Nancy, what are you doing here?
Where the Bank of America is?
Oh, she wants it up, yes. Oh, I need to try it out, but yes. Okay, let me make sure. I don't sit here yet, right? Not. Okay. Okay, perfect. I wasn't sure if Doug was still going. Okay. Oh, perfect. Thanks, David. Good. Yes. So I'm pulling up Zoom now.
Remember to VPN before logging in.
Did I? I don't know. I don't think I did. Oh, yeah. I'm like, I don't think I did. That's what we're working with.
Hello. I'll start with the West Hollywood Land Acknowledgement. The West Hollywood City Council acknowledges that the land on which we gather and that is currently known as the City of West Hollywood is the occupied, unceded, seized territory of the Gabrielino Tongva and Gabrielino Kizh people. This Planning Commission meeting is being live broadcast and teleconferenced on the city's website, and as a courtesy, this meeting is also available on the city's YouTube channel at youtube.com/WehoTV and on Roku, Apple TV, Fire TV, and Android TV. You may call in to make a comment, and you may also listen to this meeting by dialing 669-900-6833. Again, that's 669-900-6833. Your meeting ID is 826-5166-3101, and then press the pound sign. I would like to call our regularly scheduled West Hollywood Planning Commission meeting to order. It is Thursday, August 16th, 2023, and it is 6:34, and our first order is to Pledge of Allegiance. And Vice Chair Lombardi is going to lead us in that.
Thank you.
Yep. Everybody stand. Roll call.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Commissioner Meadows.
Present.
Commissioner Jones.
Here.
Commissioner Gregoire.
Here.
Commissioner Edwards.
Here.
Commissioner Copeland.
Here.
Vice Chair Lombardi.
Present.
Chair Carvalero.
Here.
And we have a quorum.
Approval of the agenda. Now, we have one change to the agenda, and that is item 9A, 8025 Santa Monica Boulevard. It is being continued, but it might come back at our next Planning Commission meeting on September 7th, so it will be noticed accordingly if it does. And I would also like to make a comment that I would like to adjourn our meeting today in the memory of Commissioner John Altschul. Commissioner Altschul served on Public Safety Commission from January 1990 until October 1996. He served on Planning Commission from October 1996 until January 2021. That's a total of 31 years of public service. Clearly, Commissioner Altschul valued public service, community discourse, and cared deeply for our creative city. He knew state law and code as well as the officials who wrote them. He understood that communities are organic, that change is inevitable, and that public discourse and collaboration are key to healthy growth in municipalities. He was a mentor for many of us, if not all of us. He survived several epidemics, including early strains of homophobia that many of us could not fathom in this day and age. He always made me smile, even when we didn't agree. I miss so much about him, especially his signature tangerine-colored glasses. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
I'll second.
Thank you.
Motion by Commissioner Meadows, seconded by Commissioner Jones. And the agenda for Thursday, August 17th, 2023 is approved as amended, unanimous.
Thank you, David. Item 5, approval of meeting minutes from July 20th. Do I have any changes? Anybody have changes? No? Nope.
I move approval.
Thank you. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Thank you.
Motion by Commissioner Gregoire, seconded by Commissioner Meadows. And the minutes for July 20, 2023 are approved as presented, noting Commissioner Jones abstaining from this vote.
Thank you. Public comment. This time is set aside for the public to comment on items not on tonight's agenda. David, do we have any public comments tonight?
No, Chair, we are all clear on public comments.
Okay. Do we have a director's report? Yes.
Yes, we do. Thank you, Chair. Francisco Contreras, long-range planning manager, acting director for the next couple of weeks. In fact, I have some news regarding the director position. So the city did announce the appointment of Nick Marisich as the new community development director. So Nick is going to join us from the city of Los Angeles, where he's been working there for many, many years in a lot of various different planning capacities. So his first day in the city will be next month on the 18th, so September 18th. So he will be joining us after that. I think he has a series of community meetings where he's going to be able to meet with community members and start really kind of laying the groundwork for his tenure with the city. So just wanted to share that news with you. In addition to that, I think there was a special city council meeting on Monday along with the Public Safety Commission, where there was some discussion about public safety items, particularly a study conducted by the Center for Policing Equity. I believe I have that correctly, just regarding statistics and data in the city of West Hollywood with regards to policing. So there were some very interesting findings on that report. So I'd recommend, if you haven't had a chance to take a look at that, it's on the council agenda. And there were also some recommendations from the Public Safety Commission on potentially incorporating some technology that might help with public safety efforts throughout the city. So council was very supportive of introducing some of that technology, as long as we do a little bit more analysis and research into the development of policies as to when and where some of the technology may or may not be used, safeguards, privacy issues, and so forth. So those were some of the items. At the next city council meeting, there will be a cultural resource application that's going to be reviewed for the buildings at Plummer Park. So this is for Long Hall, Great Hall, and for Fiesta Hall. So that'll be going to the next city council meeting. And then we will also have an update on the protected bike lanes project, both for Fountain Avenue and Santa Monica Boulevard. So that will be an update for city council. And then lastly, the council will be reviewing the zone text amendment for the replacement of above lower income units that the Planning Commission recommended approval a couple of meetings ago. So that will be going to the City Council on August 21st. So that concludes my report. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Do we have any questions for our director? No? Thank you. Item 8, consent calendar, we have none, and that brings us to our only public hearing tonight. Item 9B, it's a zone text amendment. The commission has been asked to consider a zone text amendment to lengthen the initial dwelling lease term for individual residences and condominiums located in West Hollywood. And we have a staff report from Michelle Montenegro.
Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for having me today. I'll be covering the zone text amendment to lengthen initial minimum lease terms, specifically for individually owned condos and single-family residences. Sorry, I'm just waiting for the presentation to, there we go. Okay. So the contents of my presentation today will cover shortly what the directive is, the context of this directive and our proposal, the amendment code that will be changing if recommendation and city council approval is to be done, and then lastly we'll have time for questions. So this should be a relatively short presentation. To welcome the directive, it became active in August 2020 with the adoption of ordinance number 201112. This established a minimum lease term specifically for dwelling units, such as apartment dwelling units, for at least 1 year, and then a month-to-month lease afterwards. So amended West Hollywood Municipal Code 1936-275. As a list of exceptions, individually owned condominiums and single-family residences were accepted from this section, along with transitional and emergency houses. Also, specifically, a buyback provision was built in, so if a seller was to sell their unit to a buyer, that buyer can then lease back that unit to the seller for a short period of time. So we're speaking specifically about individually owned condos and single-family residences today. To welcome in some of the context, we wanted to highlight the strategic goals and priorities of the city to really frame the conversation. So we wanted to talk about balancing community and industry needs. The first is to maintain the city's unique urban balance with emphasis on residential neighborhood while also promoting economic development. And we also wanted to highlight the importance of having a quality housing stock, but having West Hollywood as a regional hub and innovator. So balancing those two items today kind of became the proposal for our recommendation of 60 days. We wanted to highlight certain indicators that are important to hold in mind. There are nearly 23 occupied dwelling units within the city, and about 4,500 of these are owner-occupied. So when we're talking about this provision tonight, we're talking specifically about individually owned condos and single-family residences, which make up about 6,400 of these 23,000 units within the city, or occupied dwelling units within the city. So that makes about 72% of these units are occupied by owners currently, while 28% are occupied by renters. That shows a little bit more information about renter versus owner tendencies today. We also wanted to highlight some of the main points of the staff report. There are several indicators that led us to a 60-day proposal. We looked primarily at the temporary or gig economy to tell us what story needs to be there for the employment industry. So about 8% of all positions in the entertainment sector are categorized as gig economy or gig jobs. We don't have the most strong or straightforward data to support how long temporary housing needs are, since census data doesn't track that, but we can distill what the needs are based on these general metrics. So another item is that an average tenure of contract for temporary employees is about 10.1 weeks in 2021 based on a business analyst report. And then we also look towards the healthcare reporting. We hear in quite a few testimonies and public comments that medical tourism is a huge portion of stays in West Hollywood with proximity to Ronald Reagan and Cedars-Sinai. So we look towards their specific healthcare reporting for average long-term stay, most accordingly to surgeries and post-surgery functions. So for Ronald Reagan, it approximately is about 8 days, while Cedars-Sinai has a longer and bigger long-term facility, so their average is about 25 days. We also wanted to include some complaint data, although not in the staff report. We were able to gather complaint data over the last year from code compliance. So this is a breakdown of complaint data by housing type. So the first is apartments, then condos, single-family residences, and other. So for apartments, about 50% of all the complaints that were entered in with code compliance came from apartments, and about 1% of all complaints came from condos, and 24% came from single-family residences. Other was when looking up the assessor type of these housing addresses, we found that it would not fit under the clear slot of apartments, condos, and single-family residences, but they make up about 24% of all the complaints. And the column on the furthest of right would be the percent of count by housing type. So this is all to say that out of all the apartments within the city, 2% have had complaint data associated with it. This number could be inflated if a complaint was made more than one time to a single housing type. So there was no way to really differentiate those. But that gives you kind of a general consensus of what's going on in terms of residential disruption beyond anecdotal evidence that has been given to us. So next we wanted to talk a little bit more about what the proposed amendment is. It's a fairly straightforward modification to municipal code. This would affect section 1936-275. The statement would read, individually owned condominium dwelling units and single-family residence when leased shall be rented for an initial lease term of at least 60 days rather than 31 days, as evidenced by a written rental or lease agreement. So we really wanted to point out in this graphic that all other housing types beyond those specifically exempted do have 365 days or 1-year lease per the original ordinance, except specifically the 2 housing types we're talking about today, which would jump from 31 days to 60 days if the recommendation was to carry through. And that finalizes our presentation. So we're open to any questions that you may all have.
Thank you. Questions for staff? Commissioner.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I saw from the staff report that you indicated that there is demand and benefit to the greater Los Angeles area to have shorter-term rentals available. For the most part, there is a demand for short-term rentals within the 31 days. What I didn't see in the staff report was really any analysis of whether that there was a problem with having that 31-day limit, right? And if there is a problem, would extending it to 60 days solve that problem? I've been convinced over the years that there are a lot of negative impacts caused by short-term rentals, say, for example, through Airbnb. And the city obviously has taken steps to remedy that and curtail that. But for the most part, those are rentals that are well within 31 days. So I guess, was there any sort of analysis of, are there negative impacts on rentals that go to 31 days? And again, if there are problems that have been identified, will extending it to 60 days solve those problems?
I think that's a hard indicator to capture, given that we don't have a repository of leases within the city, so we don't necessarily know how long leases are and to what number that they make up total single-family residences and condos. The complaint data, even though it doesn't speak to that, could be a tangential variable that we could look at, and that was probably the closest thing that we could get to it. So I would say that there isn't a straightforward analysis as you requested or suggested, but maybe we can think a little bit more about what that could look like or how we could capture that. But past being like a survey or something like that, I don't think there's really any way to capture that. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Commissioner Jones?
Thank you very much. I want to dig into some of the stats that you shared because I guess want to understand a little more about the correlation here. Some of them, unless I missed something, were not in the staff report, so I want to dig into that a little bit. In terms of the average tenure of the contract and temp employees in 2021, I mean, I don't have any basis for comparison. That was also pretty much, let's just call it a COVID year. It was kind of a wash, so I just assume that people, maybe I shouldn't assume, but my educated guess would be that people may have been staying longer just because of things like social distancing, needing to, stay apart from one another. I also don't know how much that was affected, traveling nurses or other like hospital employees who may not be full-time employees. So just, do you have any additional context you can provide there?
What we could say is that reporting data was an average before. It was for the year 2021, but years prior to that, in terms of 2020 and 2019, seemed about the same.
Okay.
If we're tracking over years' time.
Okay.
Yeah, but the 2021 number was the most recent metric we could capture. It wasn't studied beyond that year to 2022 or 2023.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the complaints that you showed, are those largely noise complaints? Do we have more data? I mean, I assume code compliance, if it's probably going to be about noise, but can you dig a little bit more into that or tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it was more variable. So it included noise complaints, trash, just overall maintenance issues. So we didn't confine them to this particular type of complaint, but we do have the capability to do that if we wanted to express that information a little bit more detailed. But I unfortunately don't have this particular by complaint data right now.
I got it, and that's okay. I wouldn't ask you to do that. And do we have any data that relates or correlates the complaints just as a number and the length of the lease? I guess that probably wouldn't be something that's documented, but I'm just curious to know. I think that also gets back to kind of a question that I had early on reading through this was like, do we know how many of the affected units are actually doing, leases or rental agreements for 31 days only? I'm guessing that we probably don't know that information.
I think it's the same kind of answer to Commissioner Gregoire. We don't have those documented,
Yeah.
so we can't really make the correlation there.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Sorry, Commissioner Matos.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to clarify for the record, with these complaints that are coming in for the single condominiums or the single family homes, the way that we enforce the minimum lease standard is via code compliance complaint, correct?
Correct.
So it's not that we're proactively policing leases, it's that we are depending on the residents to make a complaint. Is that correct?
Correct. So they're enforced or reported the same way as a traditional apartment lease, where a resident or someone in the community has to report that directly to us, but there isn't an active enforcement program like there is with short-term rentals.
Okay, so it'd be fair to say that there's a large number of issues that might go underreported or maybe get dealt with a homeowners association type regulation.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Copeland.
Thank you, Chair. You may not have the exact numbers on this, but we do have a short-term rental building on Sunset. Is that correct? Where
Correct.
That could fill those types of traveling people, short-term people. We do have a building that is allowed to do those still on Sunset. Is that correct?
Yeah. So
In addition to the traditional hotel rooms, we do have that building.
correct. I believe you're talking about the AKA project with the
right.
lawsuit. Yeah, that was a very narrow scope, but ultimately that project could request a shorter term, less than 30 days stay with an administrative permit, and then with a CUP can request less than 5 days. So that could apply to projects on Sunset specifically, within the Sunset specific plan, that could prove that they were leasing out on short term prior to that adoption of that ordinance.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Commissioner Edwards.
Just a basic question. When you gave the percentages of the complaints, do you have actually real hard numbers on that? Is it like 25 out of 25,000 or?
Not on me, but yes, we do. I apologize for that. Yeah, but the condos, if I can remember, were about 10 units out of all the units, all the condo units. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact numbers on hand, but yeah.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Lombardi.
Thank you. If I could just take it a step back for 1 minute, and if you could help make sure I'm understanding the history of why we're here and hearing this right now. So it was 2020. City Council at that time was looking to increase or set a minimum lease term of 1 year, right?
Correct.
Thank you. And there was some discussion, I guess, at that time that led us to this meeting today. And that was because there was a decision made at that time that certain unit types, including condominiums and single-family units, would maybe be allowed to have 31-day leases as their minimum instead. But there was some concern around that, right?
About the specific lease term
Yes.
for condos and single-family residences. Yes, so originally the 31-day proposal was adopted, but there was also consideration to 60 or 90 days was another two numbers that were thrown out.
Okay. And then just to understand, because I see that there's a balance that we're trying to do here. So we're looking at, the community and disruption in the community in terms of, high turnover units versus variety of housing needs, including gig workers and what that may mean, and making sure businesses are competitive as well, including businesses that may be in healthcare or entertainment, where there may be some short-term employees that would be looking for housing for a period of 30, 60, or 90 days. Do you know the city of Burbank, for example, what is their setup with leases? Is it a 1 year minimum for the first year, and is that across all housing types?
So for Burbank specifically, it's a 1 year lease type for all housing types except specifically for ADUs, which is 90 days. Most cities within the region limit ADUs to 30 days, which is equivalent to state law provision, while all other housing types are 1 year.
Okay. And because we're specifically looking at these exception cases, condominium and single family housing, and I know definitions can be confusing, and I got tripped on this when we were having a discussion earlier. What we're talking about now only applies to condominiums and single family homes, but not ADUs.
Correct.
Okay.
The principal home on a single family.
And so then ADUs have a 1 year minimum lease term currently for the city of West Hollywood.
Correct, because they're not on the
Okay.
exception list, yeah.
And then maybe you could provide some insight into this, because I know that the setup in West Hollywood is maybe a little bit different than some other cities. So I guess some cities maybe have a housing setup or an extended stay hotel type setup. We don't have that.
Yeah, we do not have that land use type. That was a conversation that came up with the original adoption of the ordinance that would be evaluated in the future, but we have yet to adopt any permitted uses for extended stay hotel, for an example.
Okay. So perhaps this is trying to open that opportunity in some extent
Fulfill
within
that
the city.
need. Mm-hmm.
At the same time, it comes at the cost of maybe, well, we'll talk about that later. Okay, so the other thing that I was wondering is, I know, living in a condo building, that there's also an Assembly Bill 3182, which made some changes, and I think that occurred after City Council heard this item. And I don't know if you wanted to provide any insight into that, or I could ask you more specific questions. I know we had a discussion about this earlier, so just wanted to bring that forward here.
Sure, I can give a little bit of insight. So AB 3182 specifically prevented special interest developments, or HOAs, in other words, from more restrictive rental lease terms or agreements. So it basically would prevent a condo unit, for example, to be leased for less than 30 days. So in this case, the lowest denominator would be the municipal code provision, would be the essential way to put it.
Okay, and so what that bill has done is, for instance, if an HOA had a 1-year minimum lease policy, that's not allowable anymore. Correct. So now they cannot limit it to anything less than 31 days. So I know you don't have data on this for sure, but in theory, there are many condo buildings that may have had a 6 or 1-year lease minimum that now are only able to set a 31-day. So I'm just thinking out loud here, but it's, you know, how much of that occurred. I know firsthand some of it has, but that's maybe changed the context of, you know, what we're discussing today versus what City Council was discussing a few years back in 2020. Okay. And then I think that's really the last question, other than I wanted to confirm that the transient occupancy tax, the TAT that is in place in the city, that's only for 31-day or less stays. Correct.
Will not apply.
Okay, and then it's included in the staff report, but there's potentially a little bit of confusion there in terms of how that would apply, at least at face value, when you're looking at the various regulations in our zone text, if we were to extend stays beyond 31 days to 60 days or 90 days for condominiums and single-family homes. Maybe any clarification there, or is that, what's the confusion, or what's the point there?
So TOT would not apply in this case. It would only apply to short-term leases or uses that are hotel stays. So it would not be applicable. I don't know if that answered your question or if you wanted more details.
I guess so. I guess I'm just kind of thinking about what other cities have in place and maybe what West Hollywood does not currently have with regards to those sort of middle-term stays versus very short-term and longer-term.
Yeah, I can't speak to what the equivalent of a TOT would be in a different city or where it would apply. Unfortunately, I don't have that information, but
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Michelle, just picking up on what Vice Chair Lombardi was mentioning about that bill out of the state, when I read it, it sounds like it's only for condos that change hands from here or from the new year going forward. It doesn't apply to anything that's already instated by an HOA, right?
You're talking about AB 3182?
Yeah.
I believe it was all properties past 2012, if I read it correctly.
Oh, okay. So it does apply retroactively, and HOAs can't limit rentals.
Yes, Yes, under 30 days, yeah. I think it does. Lauren, I don't know if you can confirm at all.
I think that was our reading of it earlier today,
Yeah.
that it impacts what the HOAs do, and I believe the year in it was 2012, but we can look.
So an HOA, if there actually are issues in a condo complex, an HOA can't put guidelines in place that say no rentals under 90 days any longer.
They can place rentals, they can place regulations to prevent the rental below 30 days, but past 30 days, they cannot.
Yeah, I think the intent of that overall bill was really to encourage that rentals occur in condo buildings, that they won't be restricted because there's needs for rentals, and there's a lot of condo units that are not being occupied by anybody. So the idea with that is that let's make them rentable, and there might be some CCNRs and that restrict rentals for less than a year or whatever that might be. And I think the bill said, well, let's eliminate that from the CCNRs. Let's make those units rentable. So I think what we're proposing wouldn't be in conflict with that, because we're just we're allowing those rentals to happen. It's just with a different number of days versus what was considered before. So
Got it. I guess my point was, given there's so few complaints, and could a condo building just instate in their HOAs the guidelines that we're trying to talk about, or we're talking about now, and just focus on single-family homes? Because are we talking about disruption in a condo building? Are we actually talking about disruption on our city streets? And the public comment, or the letter that we received today, seemed to be more about what's happening in a specific building, particularly not chaos on our streets because of short-term rentals. So in my mind, I immediately went, well, why can't an HOA take care of this if it's actually happening in their building? Why do we need to regulate that across the board? And maybe we just deal with single-family homes, but a lot of the complaints, or what I read in the letter, are things like multiple keys and passes being shared. That would never happen. That probably wouldn't happen in a home situation. That would only happen in a condo building. So for me, I'm not quite certain what we're trying to accomplish here. But any other questions? Nope. Great. I know we don't have any disclosures, but I'll ask, does anybody have any disclosures? Oh, Commissioner Mata.
I spoke with members of the public about items contained in the staff report.
Great, thank you. Do we have any public speakers on this item?
Chair, I have no public speakers in council chambers, and we are all clear on the Zoom platform.
Okay. So I guess I didn't open the public speaking portion. So Commissioner deliberation. Commissioner Martinez, go ahead. Okay.
We're going to fight about this one. Yeah, I think we've seen in the past the issues with the 31 days was it seemed to be an invitation to cheat. And we're turning to 2 weeks. And we have, with single family homes, we're having party houses. And it's creating disruption to the safety and the enjoyment of the people surrounding in the neighborhoods. I personally would rather see something like, I don't want to tell a single family homeowner that they can't take a job abroad for 6 months and not pay their mortgage, or, but I think 60 days is still a bit on the lower side. I'd rather see it 120 or even 90 days so that we have people who are here for a semester or an internship or who want to be residents, and, they are invested in the community a little bit more than our housing stock turning in basically to hotels or extended stay hotels without the benefit of security cameras and on-site personnel that the hotels and extended stays do have. Some of the issues that have happened in multi-unit apartments, may be similar in condos. I know they've been in single-family home, which is everything from the partying, the trash, to drug drops and safety issues, all kinds of people coming and going. People generally like to know who their neighbors are, especially in multi-unit buildings. So I think 31 days is definitely too short. And I would rather see it even more than 60 days to see if but if we go with 60 days, if we could come back and assess that after maybe 6 months or 12 months and see if that's made any difference in the complaints with the party houses and the issues that have gone on. And, you know, I think our first priority and thought has to be the quality of life and safety for our residents and potentially long-term residents and current long-term residents. And we do have an extended stay building on Sunset for people that want to be here for 25 days. We have hotels if you're here for a party or vacation. And I don't think we should be turning our housing stock into that kind of environment. So I'm really not in favor of that. So 12 months is great for the apartments. The condos, that's a little bit more sticky for me. They do have HOAs. I wonder how effective they are in preventing those kinds of things. That was my question with the HOAs. But single-family homes, definitely, this has been something that we've heard about here and that City Council's heard about, and we've seen correspondence about before, about the parties and the things that are going on. So I'd like to see more. I'd like to see 90 or 120 days. But if it's 60 days, then perhaps we could assess that and see if there's any difference in the future. Other than that, I'd like to hear what my fellow commissioners have to say. That's it for me right now, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Matos.
Thank you, Chair. So there's a couple of things that are going through my mind when I review what's being presented. First of all, to be clear, I do and I am inclined to support the staff recommendation of 60 days, and I'll tell you why. I actually think that this discussion is very timely for numerous reasons. We've seen that the council has taken an increased interest in regulating short-term rentals, that there's been impacts to the housing stock on affordability specifically. If someone is able to get more money on a short-term basis to rent their property, they might be more inclined to do that. And what that does is it drives up the prices of housing, and then it has an impact on rentability and affordability for people who are looking to live and work in this community. And I think that, you know, this city and the council and every policy that we've seen come out of the council has been inclined to support long-term tenancy and to support affordability of existing housing stock and the ability to be able to come into this community and afford living here on a long-term basis. The other thing that I want to say is that our city infrastructure has a very robust, to Commissioner Copeland's point, hotel industry. We have a very robust hotel industry that is able to support short-term needs. To her point, there's been other entities and opportunities for people that are in the healthcare sector or in the gig job sector of the entertainment industry to be able to come in on a short-term basis and utilize those resources here in West Hollywood. So I'm not as worried about that. But I think at the end of the day, the short-term need that we're seeing, we have an infrastructure in the city that's able to support it. I am really, you know, I feel very strongly that we should support the staff recommendation, and I think that council should consider this. I do think, that it's timely given the recommendations and policy changes we've seen in short-term rentals. And I think that we should be prioritizing in our housing stock, you know, the ability to come in and afford rent in West Hollywood. And I think that 60 days is a great, you know, as a floor is a great opportunity for us because it leaves a window, but it also considers that, you know, if there is a very, very short-term need, that there's an infrastructure to address that. And it, you know, prevents these housing units from coming away from long-term tenancies and going strictly to short-term. So that's my thoughts on this, for whatever it's worth, and I'm inclined to support the staff recommendation, but I'm open to discussion on, you know, length.
Commissioner Jones? No?
I can talk now or I can wait. Sorry. For whatever reason, it's very hard to hear down here, but I feel like my voice is very loud, so I'm sorry if I'm blowing everyone out right now. I guess, in reviewing this, and this may sound obvious, but there are kind of different places that, I have an opportunity to kind of live and travel in the state of California. One is in Santa Cruz County, where housing needs are similar to, it's a different set of circumstances, but it's different than it is here. Or Idlewild, California, where, 40% of the people who own homes there, among them myself, do not live there full time. So, I'm thinking about this within the context, obviously, of our city and the specificity of the needs of our city. I guess one of the things that I struggle with, and this is probably obvious from some of the questions that I asked, is I support the spirit of 60 days, but I don't know if there's data to support the 60 days. I guess that's where I struggle a little bit. Like, there's a lot of hypotheticals happening. I know that people are very vocal when there is a noisy or rude or, inconsiderate neighbor, code compliance is called. I understand that, but I know there's a lot of buzz about it, but in terms of substantiated data that this is happening or being abused, in excess, I don't feel like we have that kind of data, and we might never, and that's okay. But what I don't want to do is take away the ability for, people who do legitimately need a place to stay for a month and not longer. And that I have to imagine that exists. We're a very popular destination for a whole variety of reasons, whether it's work, medical tourism, leisure. So I think I'm a little conflicted. I don't think I would want to support anything over 60 days, to Commissioner Matos's point. But I guess I struggle a little bit with understanding or believing, without having more data to substantiate it, that having things that are just 31 days is really a problem. I know we can all cite the example, I'm sure you've all heard about this, of the house on Lucerne in Larchmont Village that just got, kind of brought down, not in the city of West Hollywood. I am sure that there are, have been similar situations or, party homes here. But I sometimes wonder if the, kind of frequency of that happening is maybe not more overblown by people's annoyance about it. I'm not questioning anyone's experience. I just, again, would really like to see more data around this before we make a determination that might affect people's ability to enjoy the city or have housing that meets their needs. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm open to discussion, but not more than 60 is kind of where I stand right now.
Commissioner Gluckor.
So I struggled with this one a little bit. My initial feeling was like, oh yeah, that's fine. I think this is a good idea, was my initial impression of it, right? And I think it's because I have been thoroughly convinced that short-term rentals has a negative impact on the city, right? But I think I sort of previewed what I was going to say a little earlier. This isn't really, 31 days isn't really what I'm thinking of as a short-term rental. A short-term rental is a 3-day weekend party pad, right? Or maybe a week at most. 31 days is not the type of short-term rental that's going to have a negative impact on the city. So I wonder, is this a solution seeking a problem? I don't know if there is a problem here. And should we take away the flexibility of a property owner to rent their place out for a month if there really isn't a problem being solved here? Again, just to repeat, I'm thoroughly convinced of the negatives of short-term rentals, but this is not a short-term rental. I just don't, there's no data, there's no complaints. And my sense is having a 31-day minimum or a 60-day minimum or a 90-day minimum, that's not going to do anything against promoting long-term rentals, right? Yeah, I think we should promote long-term rentals. But I'm not sure it matters whether it's 30, 60, or 90 days. My vision of of the impact of a 30-day limitation is really what it means if I'm going to go live in New York City for the summer, I can't rent my place out for 2 weeks while I'm gone. It's going to have to be at least 30 days. You know, if I'm going to go to New York for the summer, I'd love to rent it out for 60 or 90 days, right? But hey, if I can't find someone for 60 days, I'd be happy to rent it out for 30 days. So I don't know. I guess I neither oppose or support this. I also would note there isn't any public outcry from property owners or from the community in general here. I didn't see any public comments in writing or here in person opposing this. So why should we oppose it, right? I just don't think it's necessary. I wouldn't have brought this proposal, but I don't necessarily want to be seen as opposing it. I just don't think it's going to matter one way or another whether it's 30, 60, or 90 days. I don't see the point of changing the law and going through this exercise unless somebody can point to the negative impact of a 31-day rental limitation and that a 60 or 90-day rental limitation is going to fix that problem. So again, I'm not prepared to vote against it. I'll probably vote in favor of it because I'd like this to move on to City Council. After all, they're the elected leaders, and I think they should weigh in on this. I just don't think it's really necessary to bring this forward or change the law. I'm happy putting it in the hands of our 5 elected City Council.
Thank you. Commissioner Edwards.
I'm really appreciating the robust conversation. I do agree. I'm still confused because it doesn't seem like I agree that there seems to be a solution in search of a problem. That there might be one-offs here and there, but overall, like the data doesn't tell me a compelling story of the need for regulation. Because I believe this body wants to take any consideration around regulation seriously because it does have an impact, and there's sometimes impacts that we don't anticipate. There's also, as I see it, it's a balancing act between the rights and the freedom of a property owner versus the rights and freedom of the community to enjoy, where they're at. So there's always that delicate balancing act that our nation struggles with on a consistent basis. I'm ambivalent on this one. I would ask if it goes to 60 days, if there is some conversation or some means by which we can better capture data to start understanding the story that is really happening or maybe isn't happening.
Thank you. Vice Chair Lombardi.
Thank you. In particular, I'm thinking about some of the comments from Commissioner Gregoire and Jones and Edwards, and I think that from what I feel like you were saying, this feels safe, and it also feels like there's maybe not a lot of data, and that's why we're not, as strongly opinionated on things. And I feel myself a little bit confused as well in terms of what the best path forward would be. I guess looking at things from the perspective of, opportunity, being business friendly, there's definitely something to be said about longer term short rentals, 30, 60, 90 days. Thinking about the community and the disruptions of the high turnover, that's something that comes to mind as well. And I guess one thought that I have, and some of this is from firsthand experience, is when there's only a 30-day restriction in terms of minimum stay, it's actually very hard for an HOA to track and monitor that and to do anything or react quickly. Their power is fairly limited, and so month to month could actually be a 2-week stay, and it's hard to track that. When I think about the housing crisis that we're in, I understand that we need different housing types, and so in that hand, if someone wants to rent out their place and leave for Europe, as Commissioner Copeland mentioned earlier, or travel abroad, and then make that place rentable to someone, that's great. And that's something that otherwise could maybe be an empty unit if there was a higher restriction. What I've observed where I live is that there's been a lot of units, and I did a little math, probably about 15 to 25% of them, where rather than a 1-year lease coming in or someone selling their unit, which may be at a more affordable entry-level price as a homeowner, or a unit that maybe is more reasonable than a luxury building, they're now renting it furnished month to month at a very, very high rate. And that could be a unit that someone could be living in for a year, or buying and owning as their first home. And so sales aren't happening, and 1-year leases aren't moving in, people are moving out, and month to months are happening. And some of that goes back to the assembly bill and the fact that, if a building chooses to maybe have a 1-year lease limit because they want to have more of a community atmosphere, that's not an option anymore. So I guess circling back to 2020, when this topic was first brought up and these decisions were made, I guess I'm thinking about what the city of Burbank is doing. I think Santa Monica as well. A lot of these cities seem to have a 1-year restriction on condominiums already. So, to extend it isn't really atypical, it doesn't seem, for the region. But I do appreciate the idea of a homeowner being able to have the flexibility to do what they want to, and for a unit not to sit empty, even if it is temporary. But at the end of the day, I think the trick is that we don't really have a lot of data to decide on, and so it makes it hard to make a decision. And I guess what I'm wondering is there some data, or could we provide some direction?
So Francisco and I were just looking, and beginning this year, the City Council adopted a requirement that units not subject to the rent stabilization ordinance also need to be registered. So the city just this year has started collecting data. I don't know if that will capture, you're going to New York for the summer and want someone to live in your space for 30 or 60 days. Those units may not get captured in that, but there is more data that will be available moving forward than we have had in the past.
Thank you. That's exactly where I was going to go with that. And so I know that there's surveys, I've received those letters. I know that there's a lot of data being collected. So I'm wondering if maybe we could make a more informed decision. And I don't know exactly what those points would be, but perhaps it's trying to understand what percentage of individually owned housing and condo units are being rented, and what percentage are being rented at a shorter term period of 30 days or greater if we were to move this forward today, and then City Council were to as well. And what do we feel the goals are as a city? Maybe, so I guess I'm wondering if maybe there's some direction we could provide on that front. And then with regards to what we're hearing right now, I'm so neutral right now. I don't, part of me wants to say, can we just provide some direction and look at this again? Part of me says, hey, 60 days seems safe. Why not do it and provide some direction? 90 days feels like we're bordering on a more longer term, and maybe it'd be good to have some data before we went 90 days or further. Thank you.
Commissioner Copeland.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with a lot of what Vice Chair Lombardi just said, and also Commissioner Matos. And part of the issue with 30 days was that it was, which is why we ended up with 12 months for apartments. It was an invitation to cheat. It was advertised as 30 days, but hey, you can stay 2 weeks, and if somebody's here for 2 weeks, they're here to party. And we did have the infrastructure, as Commissioner Matos spoke of, that we could handle visitors and medical people visiting. But if we're telling the public we have a housing crisis, we don't have enough housing, we need more housing for long-term residents, it just seems to smack of hypocrisy to then turn around and say, but it's okay for people to, rent out a lot of that housing and keep just renting it for 30 days and getting 3 times as much, which takes away the affordability. So I think if we're weighing and we're trying to balance, we have to err on the, or to decide on the, that balance has to lean toward community and long-term residents and affordability and not taking away from the housing pool where it turns into, as he was mentioning with the condos, it's a business venture. I really don't have any intention of renting this out to anyone, but it's a business. I can rent it out, 30 days and get 3 times as much rent than I'll get if I rent it to a person who really wants to stay here long term, or if I sell it. Then it's more of a business transaction. It's a money-making business rather than a need to provide housing or to go somewhere else. Or I think we went to 12 months with those for a lot of good reasons, and this is when people spoke up. And I believe we did get some correspondence on this afternoon in support of
Correct. I believe we
in
got
support
one
of this
public comment.
and that was from an HOA.
A condo.
Yeah,
an
about a
HOA
condominium.
president.
Okay, so it would be nice to have more specificity with data, as you said. I think there was a lot of that back in 2020 that actually led to this, and they did make these exceptions, and maybe we're readdressing them. But it would be nice to have some of the specifics of what have been the complaints with the party houses, what have they been dealt with. That would be nice to have, but I don't think it would change my feeling that we need to, our first obligation is to the community and to provide actual housing, because we do have alternatives. We have short-term rentals, we do have hotels, and 60 days is certainly not, I don't think it's burdensome, but it might help a little bit with the affordability. It might help also a little bit with the cheating, as we saw before. Advertising 30 days, but you can stay a week. And we did see that, and that did come before this commission and before council, and there were people who spoke up. And so the history of it, when we take it all into account, this happened for a reason, and some of the same problems are evidently occurring now. We don't have complete statistics, which would be nice to have, but it's not necessary for me to be in favor of going along with staff's recommendation of a minimum of 60 days. That's all for me, Chair. Thank you.
I think it's great dialogue. What keeps somebody from advertising 60 days and still renting it out for 2 weeks? It's like, I guess, what is the measure? For me, when I read the staff report, it felt a lot like optics, because we don't have the actual data to really support some of what the staff report is presenting. And when you look at the complaints, they're so low, which is why I went to, can an HOA regulate in their building if there actually is, in fact, an issue in that building? And is this really affecting our streets? And then those are kind of two separate issues that are connected. So I agree. I feel ambivalent about this. Also, though, I understand everyone's point and why they made it, especially from an affordability point of view. But I'm not sure exactly which way to take this. Go ahead, Commissioner Grabar.
I had a couple of questions for the city attorney. So what is the effect of a no vote? If we were to vote no, that we weren't recommending this to the city council, what happens to this? Does it die? Does it go back to staff, or does it still go to city council?
Every legislative change ends up with the city council. So even if the commission was to vote no change, that would go to the city council to make a final decision.
My second question was, I'm generally not shy about opposing or supporting something, but is it an option to move this onto the city council, vote to move this onto the city council with our comments that we have spoken into the record without a recommendation?
I think I would frame it as a recommendation. I mean, that's what the Planning Commission is being asked to do, to make a collective decision on policy changes, and the elected officials will ultimately make the decision. But you can frame it as your recommendation is no change, your recommendation is 60, whatever the timeline you could collectively agree to, there's options.
Okay. I have a motion.
Go ahead.
I'd like to move that we remove the stack recommendation to City Council with recommending the 60-day option.
Could you repeat that?
We recommend what the staff has presented to us. We recommend 60-day minimum on condo and single-family rentals.
Do I have a second on that?
I'll second.
Vice Chair Lombardi?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in support either way in this case. I wonder, though, if we could somehow ask that there be further study to evaluate, based on housing data we can get it, what percentage of, year plus versus 30 or 60-day kind of rentals are occurring, and that maybe this get revisited again when that data is available, so that we can continue to be informed about where this really needs to head. Because on one hand, I'm inclined to just say, like, no, let's not change anything, but let's see what we need to do. Ironically, I would like to see it extended because I see problems, whether it be providing affordable housing or disturbances in the neighborhood and everything associated with high turnover. So I guess I'm okay with it, but I wonder if we could maybe recommend that we get a study on some data, and I don't know how we would ask the timeline for that to come back, or if we even can set one, but to at least recommend that that happen, or that City Council maybe discuss that data and figure out what it could or should be, and then we could look at it again first, maybe.
So I think, do you mind if I go?
So I don't know if I'm asking to modify the motion or...
I think a way you could accomplish that is in the resolution, when the motion is to approve the resolution as proposed. You could add at the end to section 4, which is your recommendation, to say, and also ask council to consider directing staff to report back with data to revisit the matter at a timeline the council deems appropriate. So they can talk about how much data they would want to revisit it in a year, 2 years, whatever the council deems appropriate.
Okay. So we have a motion, we have a second. Shall we vote?
Commissioner Matos, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay, thanks.
Everybody's clear on what the motion is?
And the motion passes unanimously, approving draft resolution number PC 231531. There is no appeal process. This is a recommendation going to City Council.
Thank you. Item 10, new business, we have none. Unfinished business, item 11, we have none. Excluded consent calendar, item 12, we have none. Items from staff, 13. Planning manager's update.
Thank you, Chair. Francisco Contreras again, Long Range Planning Manager. So just wanted to provide you an update about the upcoming calendars for the Planning Commission and some of our other committees. So at the September 7th Planning Commission meeting, we have about 4 items. We have an airspace subdivision at 8430 Sunset Boulevard that's coming before you. There is a 7-story, 115-unit mixed-use project at 8025 Santa Monica Boulevard. Then there are a couple of zone text amendments, one of them dealing with co-living or shared housing, so that's coming forth. And then the second zone text amendment will be discussing micro units and congregate care facilities. So we are introducing some new definitions for housing types, and or refining some of our existing in order to incorporate some objective design standards into some of those as well. So that is coming up September. Nothing is currently scheduled for design review at the moment. Nothing on the agenda for long-range planning subcommittee. And I do not see anything for the Sunset Arts and Advertising Committee as well. So, except for that planning commission coming up in September, I think for now, most of the agendas look pretty clear.
So 8025 Santa Monica Boulevard has been confirmed for September 7th?
September 7th. That's what we have on the look-ahead agenda right now.
And it'll be noticed properly. It will be properly noticed?
Correct.
Okay, we mentioned that earlier today. Do we have any other questions for the Director? No? Great. Thank you. Items from the Commission. Oh, public comment, sorry.
Chair,
David, do we have any-
we're all clear.
Okay, great. Item 15, items from the commissioners. Does anybody have anything to say? Commissioner Jones.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for adjourning in memory of John Outshul. John was on the commission from the day that I joined. He was one of the longest serving members. I was very sad to hear of his passing. I didn't get to see him at all during COVID. So I wish him and his friends the very best. He was a real addition to this community, and he was a friend of mine, and I will miss him very much. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Nope. Great. Okay, so I am adjourning our our Planning Commission meeting till Thursday, September 7th, 2023 at 6:30. Thank you.